Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here at the Future Trends Forum. I will be talking about innovation, as Chris suggested, and I shall be coming out strangely in favor of it. We shall try to do that in a very disciplined sense. We are known at Doblin for our metrics about innovation, and responding specifically to requests from Chris and other experts at Monitor, I have adapted our metrics to give us regional patterns of innovation that I hope will be useful to foster and jumpstart the conversations today. Before I do that, however, I want to try to give people a grounding in the surprising mechanisms that cause innovation to actually function and to produce economic reward. I'm very pleased that the conversation today is supposed to focus on the civil side of innovation rather than the governmental inducements to innovation. And I want to give us some sense of the mechanisms of innovation that cause it to work. And let me, as I customarily do that while trying to debunk some of the most prevalent and resilient myths about innovation. For instance, the widespread belief that it is fundamentally correlated with breakthroughs in technology or the development of some invention. So let me illustrate that by beginning with Thomas Alva Edison's original light bulb you see behind me here on the screen. A lot of people are confused about this. They think Tom Edison invented the light bulb. This is, of course, nonsense. It existed 50 years before he touched it in the country of Canada. The only problem was that the light bulb in Canada lasted on average about 7 minutes before it burned out. The problem for Tom Edison was to produce a light bulb that actually functioned. And to do that, he was obsessive about trying different materials to use as the filament in the light bulb. Tom Edison's obsession was, really quite extensive. Any of you that have ever read a history of Tom Edison know that the man was basically a freak. He was very obsessive about the way in which to use science methods and the way in which he directed the laboratory assistants in his establishment. And my starting theme for us to consider today is that sometimes things change. We all know about the triumph of the incandescent light bulb. Some of us even know that the company General Electric began its life essentially by buying up the several hundred patents in the portfolio of Tom Edison's laboratory and building a global enterprise around it. What I'd like us to get a sense of, however, is that the real nature of innovation has less to do, especially today, with the primary development of breakthrough technologies, which in the main get licensed broadly when they exist, and has more to do with the ability of individuals to see comprehensively the patterns of actions that you can take to leverage innovation going forward. So to illustrate that, I'm going to take Tom Edison. I'm going to shove him to the side here and bring up another form of lighting altogether. Technically, it's existed for more than 20 years, and yet we are at a moment where it's going to become omnipresent in the next 5, 6, or 7 years. Okay? So on the left, you see analog lighting. On the right, you see digital lighting. Next time you walk up to your own automobile, take a look at the brake lights. In all probability, the brake lights in your own automobile today exhibit the digital technology you see on the right. There's all kinds of structural reasons. Among other things, they're more pretty. You can make them in any shape you want, any color you want. You can vary the intensity of the light coming out of digital lighting. It is vastly more energy efficient. And in fact, it tends to last on average 15 years before it needs any maintenance whatsoever. For these and other structural reasons, it is imperative, basically, that switched-on enterprises, and for that matter, governments, begin to foster a transition now from analog to digital lighting. And that's the difference between innovation and invention. Innovation requires that we think about background trends and act on them in some comprehensive way. So let's imagine for the moment that I'm persuading you that we should switch from analog to digital lighting for all kinds of structural reasons. The technology's been stable for a long time. It's the moment of transition that I'm trying to give us a sense of. And if you got the sense that you wanted to foster such a transition, your initial instinct should reflect the truism from William Gibson many years ago when he said, look, start by understanding that the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So where would you go to see digital lighting? Perhaps you would go to the West End of London to look at what's happening in plays, or to Broadway in New York. Perhaps you would go to places like Times Square or Tokyo to see what's happening with, you know, the fairly extreme forms of lighting that happen in advertising. But I would urge you to go instead to Helsinki. Helsinki, Finland. Why? It's freaking dark there, okay? So if you go to Helsinki, Finland, what you would discover is that several years ago they separated the city into 26 different zones, and they invited artists, architects, designers, and engineers to come together to create what collectively is now known as the Helsinki Municipal Lighting Project. And it is the wellspring of a wide array of different experiments in applied lighting systems that collectively allow us to see in advance. Let's take some examples. In any society that gets actual daylight, you should all know that when daylight hits your skin, you are clever enough in your body to synthesize vitamin D. Sorry? In the absence of vitamin D, in the absence of sunlight, there is a prolonged deficiency in your ability to synthesize vitamin D. It doesn't naturally occur in even a well-balanced diet. So in Helsinki, they've been clever enough to adapt office lighting so that it's the right color temperature to help you create vitamin D while you work. Over here, like every other city in the world, there are things that people in Helsinki are proud of, in this case, a dead guy on a horse, and so they light him up. But they can use a variety of different levels of lighting on the basis of the background ambient temperature. Connected to sensors, it saves a lot of money. On holiday seasons, they can change the color temperature to green, red, orange, yellow, any color they want at zero incremental expense. The system is already designed to do that. You see here a streetscape with a lower level of prevailing lighting than what is normal for ambient street lighting. So it's much more cost effective, but it's also beautiful. Here you see an artist installation, which to people like you and me looks just like a pretty way to decorate an island in a shipping channel. But if you were a river barge pilot trying to get a commercial ship through that shipping lane, that is not just beautiful, but intensely functional and very helpful to you. And here you see a highway lighting system that is based on sensors. It recognizes when there's a pedestrian, a motorcyclist, or a motorist, and it lights the way forward, much like you would find in the Madrid airport on the glide path as a pilot is bringing in a 777 aircraft or equivalent, okay? So there you see a variety of experiments, and that's what I want to give us as a sense of the real nature of innovation today. It's seeing a little clearly than others, acting a little bit more decisively than others, and being more comprehensive than others in the way we embrace a time of change. What fundamentally has Helsinki invented here? My contention would be nothing. And yet, people from all over the world that are interested in the frontiers of lighting systems, and indeed a large number of corporations from Philips to General Electric and others, have actively engaged themselves in trying to help support and foster these installations for the specific reasons that it allows them to tell stories that give others a sort of profoundly different sense of possibilities. Now, much of this has happened around Spain. So to be gracious and generous about our hosts, let us begin to acknowledge things like this, the Frank Gehry Guggenheim building in Bilbao, that many people reviewed as the first great building of the 21st century when it debuted in 1999. Bilbao has gone on to have a variety of interesting mechanisms in revitalizing its economy and creating really impressive levels of organic growth ever since. Similar things have happened elsewhere in Spain. Barcelona has become one of the hippest parts of the entire world, a citadel for designers, architects, and engineers. And of course, food frontiers have been coming. We should all be grateful for this. throughout Spain with some of the frontiers of deconstructed food and new preparation techniques that have made this an incredibly interesting place to visit and to enjoy. Sometimes things change, ladies and gentlemen. That's our starting theme for the day. And I want to give us a sense that leadership in innovation involves the ability to sense the moment when an industry, when a region needs to shift fundamentally. And then you have to add to that some ability to understand the fundamental mechanisms of innovation, the things that amplify return on investment today and cause innovation to succeed instead of fail. Because unbeknownst to most people, especially the large number of people in a variety of business schools all around the world that are suddenly discovering the topic of innovation and assuming that they can crack it easily, everyone should go into the field of innovation wide-eyed and aware of the fundamentals, which is that innovation in overwhelming numbers fails when people try it, especially if they follow the conventional wisdom of how innovation is supposed to work. So in the next few minutes that I have to begin our conversation today, I want to unteach some of the things that you think you know about innovation and substitute deeply researched patterns of innovation that tell us how it actually works. And then I want to give you a sense of the building blocks of innovating reliably, routinely, and effectively, getting robust returns on investment. And as a part of my contribution to the challenges that Chris set forth for this meeting, I am bringing regional innovation effectiveness diagnostics to show you the pattern for virtually every one of the regions represented by the individuals in this room. Okay, so that's a little $400,000 present. Okay, so let me dive into that to get us started. My starting notion about innovation, when you want to move from it being a vague hope to a deep competence, when you want to get the phenomena that's happened in Bilbao and Barcelona and Helsinki to happen routinely and reliably, you have to have a different sense of what innovation is than the stock and relatively romantic notions that it's about inventing some new technology, it's about being creative, it's about inventing new products. These widely believed notions about innovation turn out to be almost always wrong. Now, I'm happy to say that in places like business schools here in Madrid, in business schools in London, and throughout other regions of the world, the field of innovation is now beginning to become hot. I teach this topic in 4 different business schools routinely. I also teach it in the #1 rated design school in the world. And there are structural reasons why the field of innovation is becoming important. Some of those structural reasons I can list here. For about 12 years now, we've had an orgy of business process re-engineering, but in most well-run enterprises and regions, the fat has long ago come out of those systems. So we're getting diminishing marginal returns for that. Operational excellence is no longer enough on its own to deliver steady advances. Now we have to find ways to deal with a vastly increasing rate of change, which I could prove if I had a few more minutes. New methods and tools, some of which I will share with you today, are emerging that vastly increase innovation hit rates. The rise of design, as I've already illustrated with examples from Madrid, Barcelona, Helsinki, and food patterns here in Spain, are emerging that are becoming an imperative for competitive effectiveness, and all companies are looking these days for the holy grail of organic growth, the driving mechanisms that allow them to have some sense of future possibilities. Whether they call it white space, blue ocean, or just organic growth, these are the fundamental drivers that people are interested in. Doblin's assertion is that in some 3 to 4 years, these ideas will be omnipresent, and we will have, not Doblin, but the world will have cracked the genetic code of innovation to make it just another competence that business schools teach and that enterprises and regions master. But for the moment, it still has some mystery in it. And I can give you the results of a very disciplined piece of work that we did on 5 continents covering 65 major industries. What we discovered to our horror and astonishment is that when enterprises tackle something unfamiliar, they fail to generate, by their own standards, an acceptable return on investment, returning the cost of capital, a stunning 95.5% of the time. This is the baseline, ladies and gentlemen, for how innovation tends to fail. And to give us a sense to embrace the full fruity flavor of this statistic, would you ever get on an airplane if the pilot failed to get you to your destination 95.5% of the time? Would you ever entrust your body to a medical team if it failed to diagnose and intervene successfully 95.5% of the time? I do not understand why people don't simply activate the machine gun turrets when the innovation teams show up, because they clearly don't know what they're doing. If this is all I had to report, I would simply, slink back home to Chicago, embarrassed and mortified. But the good news is that there's an arc of the frontier going on here, and if you stop doing the stuff that is increasingly revealed as nonsense, like brainstorming, thinking outside the box, being creative, and having all manner of nonsense masquerading as some form of effective innovation, if you stop doing those things, and in some cases we recommend electroconvulsive shock therapy where necessary, and start doing the small handful of things that make a difference, what Michael Porter would call the arc of the frontier, the new norms, what you can now expect is that your innovation initiatives will succeed between 35 and 70% of the time. Okay, between 35 and 70% of the time. That's the new norm. That, I've already done the arithmetic for you. It's a 9 to 17x improvement in baseline global norms. And it's early days. We fully believe at Doblin that innovation will continue to give up its secrets, and we will find more ways to move out here. Do I ever see a time where innovation, like statistical process, quality control-driven methods, will get to Six Sigma levels of performance? I do not. And the reason for that is too much of innovation today depends on interdependence of platforms, network externalities, and the active attempts on the part of enterprises or regions to derail successful innovations that show too much positive momentum elsewhere. So it's a very interesting phenomenon, but already the reason why it's a hot topic is because of these improved global norms. Now here's the thing you do need to think about when it comes time to innovate. The normal way enterprises innovate, and I will just kind of give you a quick composite, is people run around the company going to all the cubicles, they thump individuals on the head, they pick the ones that sound ripest, and they stick them in a room. And they tell them that they've been volunteered to be the innovation leadership team. Senior executives then arrive and give a stirring speech. The speech always has the same form. It says, innovation is one of our prime directives and a vital important part of our strategic plan. You're the innovation team, and we are counting on you to lead these successful efforts. The last 5 or 6 times we've tried to innovate in our global enterprise has been painful and distressing, wasn't pretty, lots of failures, crashed and burned, people lost their jobs. But you are the go-to guys and gals, and we are counting on you to innovate successfully this time. Of course, you're the ones with your eyes on the marketplace. You're the ones that know where the customers are, so we're counting on you to use your best judgment. But as you innovate, remember that here at Global Enterprise, we need to generate at least $100 million in incremental revenues from innovation next year. We also need to achieve 39% RONA and 48% gross margin, so bear that in mind as you innovate. And then the senior executives, of course, leave in a haze of blue smoke. You've seen this happen before? The resulting emotional oscillation is a stunning thing to witness. People spend about 7, maybe 8 nanoseconds being proud to have been selected for the all-important innovation team. This pride gives way very swiftly, especially amongst the smartest ones, as they start to realize they have absolutely no earthly idea how to deliver on those abstract and ridiculous expectations. In an untutored team asked to innovate, if you simply seal them up in a room, throw in a raw steak every couple of days so they have some protein, and leave them to their own devices, I guarantee you that after some interval they will emerge showing you their new product ideas. For some reason, hard to explain, we are hardwired to believe that innovation equals new products. What I'm revealing to you now is 10 types of innovation. They come from a disciplined assessment of 3,000 things deemed to be successful innovations around the world, stuck into computers and boiled down until we find the commonalities across the ones that made money, okay? That were economically viable and successful in the marketplace. The least valuable thing that you can focus on, and I can prove this, is new products. The least valuable thing you can focus on is new products, and yet it's the standard default condition for most innovation teams. A baby step away from a new product that is 10 giant steps away in magnifying return on investment is a product system. Think about that as Microsoft Office, for instance. Whatever your complaints, and I'm sure there are many, about PowerPoint and Excel and Outlook and Word and the rest, the fact that they are gathered together into a tightly integrated package makes them difficult to compete against. It helps, of course, that they're a monopolist, and they have some insight into what's coming in their own future operating systems. Some years ago, it was fashionable to ignore the requirements of service when you innovated. Nobody does that anymore if they want to succeed. Service is an integral expectation. 11 years ago, it started to become fashionable to think in terms of processes too. Not only what we make, but how we make it. In the innovation lexicon that matters, we try to separate out two kinds of distinct process innovations. Core processes can be proprietary to your enterprise, the secret sauce that somehow or other you know how to do, others don't know how to do. The other type of innovation that matters a lot and is explosively growing is enabling processes. These are things you can buy from SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, and all the others. But your job as an innovator is to stitch those things you purchase together to do something net new to the world or new to your industry. That's when you get credit for it being an innovation. These 5 types of innovation that we have researched and extensively studied by far dominate the way most large-scale enterprises think. Which is, of course, a bloody shame because the evidence proves that the other 5 types of innovation are much more directly correlated with disruption of marketplaces, success in innovation, and high return on investment. So downstream 3 are channel, brand, and customer experience. And the 2 that I save for last are the ones that I spend most of my time working on with postgraduate PhD students and graduate students, both in design and in business schools. It's the ability to network effectively with other firms and the ability to get paid in some novel way for what you do, business model and networking. By far, those 2 drivers of innovation turn out to mostly amplify return on investment when you get them right. If you want to be effective at innovation in your region, if you want your enterprises to be brilliant at innovation, it helps to think of these as musical notes, and it helps to define the job as either being a great composer or a virtuoso performer in your ability to use more of the types of innovation with more variety. Almost never does any robust, game-changing innovation emphasize only one. In fact, rule of thumb, getting to 4 or more types of innovation orchestrated simultaneously tends to produce things like Apple iPods and other breakthrough sorts of innovations that ultimately go on to change the world. Now, this is not a customary, reasonable, or normal way to think. Part of the reason is that one of my heroes, C.K. Prahalad, taught the whole world to think and act in terms of core competencies. This is now the lifeblood of planning in most corporations. Core competencies, the way C.K. Prahalad thought about it, were intended to be an amplifier of change, a way to de-risk change. Unfortunately, the way most enterprises have embraced it It, in fact, is a thin way of vetoing anything unfamiliar to our enterprise. This breaks C.K. Prahalad's heart, okay? He is very upset about it, and the great man himself said recently when he was writing about core competencies, well, okay, if you've got some core competencies, go ahead and think about them, but everybody does that now. You want to change the world? You want to find the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, among other things? You've got to come up with a fantastic new customer experience. You've got to get paid for it in some profound new way. And for bonus points, says C.K. Prahalad, that will force you to renew the enterprise and invent new competencies. Does the world get this yet or not? Remember that I train lots and lots of designers around the world. Some years ago, we sent out a survey instrument asking people not to tell us explicitly about what they were inventing, but to profile it according to some questions we asked. What we discovered is that what's off the charts around the world is the search for new products. Remember what I said 12 minutes ago? 95.5% of these are going to fail. Ladies and gentlemen, these are lambs being led to slaughter, okay? Or in the vernacular of today's American teens, what you're looking at is the choices of the losers, okay? Now let me strip out the losers. My base goes from more than 10,000 to fewer than 200, and the choices of the winners are in fact very different. The people making money off of innovation are partnering effectively with other firms, creating vitally new business models to get paid in new ways, buying lots of technology but maintaining some form of secret sauce, creating a terrific, interesting, and powerful customer experience, and as the Brits would say, sexing up the brand. You do some combination of those 6 things, and you will almost always disrupt industries and produce something that has robust return on investment. And to give you the Pareto optimization, it's no mere 20-80 rule. Imagine this, ladies and gentlemen, fewer than 2% of the projects produced in the last 10 years have generated more than 90% of the global economic value added for innovation. So there's a small number of huge winners in the world of innovation, and they tend to reflect this way of thinking. Now that turns out to be hard for most enterprises and for most organizations, but we can play for a few moments the spot the innovation game to see how these principles are being, in fact, embraced around the world. By the way, you can use the 10 types of innovation either to diagnose things that are in development or already exist in the world. More proactively, you can use it to shape your sense of possibilities going forward. But if we take a look at the company Dell, they have led a brutally difficult personal computer industry for 22 years, generating the most robust profitability until the first 6 months of this year. What's going on here? Michael Dell and his team have systematically integrated, not consciously originally, but accidentally, 8 distinct types of innovation. They did so out of necessity. They wouldn't have survived otherwise against better brands known to be manufacturers. What did they not do? They didn't focus on product. Their products are ugly, ordinary, and always designed to be 100% compatible with things invented by others elsewhere. Okay? So they didn't do the exact instinctive things that other firms do. Here's Google. In 5 short years, they've become the most successful media company in history, and they have a better market capitalization right now than several countries in the world. And you're using distinctively 8 types of innovation. A 9th type will come on by the end of this year when they turn on their free Wi-Fi search experiment throughout Silicon Valley in California and the West Coast of the United States. And here, to give local credit where credit is due, in Madrid, the hospital system has exhibited 5 distinct types of innovation and has popped up around the world as one of the best performers in terms of healthcare practices. A very nice relief to those of you who have already noticed you have insurance coverage while you're here. If anything happens to you, you not only are insured for it, but you will get well treated in the local hospital systems. Now, I promised you some diagnostic tools that would give us the basis for understanding the starting places of the regions that you represent here at the Future Trends Forum. This topic is generally about knowing not just what to think about. The 10 types of innovation should materially alter how you think about innovation. This topic is about how you pursue it with the appropriate processes that tend to work instead of fail. And to do that, my constant exhortation is that people learn to do high protocol innovation instead of low protocol innovation. The scenario I was giving you earlier, where people are volunteered to be on the innovation team, invariably leads to them brainstorming new ideas. It's exactly those kinds of low protocol methods that generate these stunning high failure rates of 95.5% or greater. If you want to stop innovating in weak and ineffectual ways and start innovating effectively, when you load down the file later, note this file, the slide number 27, along with the 10 types of innovation, these two models are routinely cited by our clients around the world as the things that changed their sense of possibilities. This is specifically $400,000 worth of research about how you get innovation to succeed instead of failing. If you ended up in the hospital here in Spain that I just showed you a few moments ago, later this same day with blood spurting out of an artery, I guarantee you that they would not surround you with a gaggle of medical professionals saying, "Oh, great, a patient, let's brainstorm." Okay? They would know that they have roughly 4 minutes to save your life before you're dead. That is diagnostics in action, okay? And high protocols at work. This is what we need in the world of innovation. We need to begin in a disciplined sense. We need to work with leaders in companies or regions to shape an innovation intent, a distant cousin of strategic intent that gives you a mission for innovation. The lack of a mission for innovation causes innovation to be random and to not get cumulatively more powerful and self-reinforcing over time. You then need to set the conditions so that the average team succeeds at innovation instead of fails at it. You need to not use brainstorming and other forces of chaos. Instead, you need to use powerful and disciplined ideation methodologies, which we call authoring initiatives. And then you need to foster the successful adoption and adaptation and development of those initiatives downstream. Everything you see here in blue is colored blue as a code for you to remember when later you reflect upon this. This is the innovation work that must be done by senior executives in an enterprise. The CEO, heads of strategy, heads of divisions, heads of marketing, heads of functions. They need to come together to do these things in blue. And in the overwhelming number of institutions around the world, whether it's government, organizations, or enterprises, these things in blue are simply an error of omission. People don't know they can do them, don't know they should do them. This is why a growing number of business schools are beginning to teach the topic. On the other hand, once you set all of these conditions and do the right things as leaders, it does not automatically give rise to breakthroughs. So there are other things that have to be done by each and every innovation team if you want to get them to innovate effectively. So they must make a series of discoveries about human beings and what they're trying to do in their lives and how that's changing. They must embed those discoveries, as you see in Helsinki, or dining systems in Spain, or in Barcelona, or in Bilbao. You need to invent a variety of things that are distinctive and interesting and compelling for human beings, prototyping them rapidly, testing them, and making sure that they work. You then need to launch them to a breathlessly awaiting global public. Oh, by the way, one of the things that has changed materially in the last 25 years is that design firms and design schools all around the world have become quite systemic and effective at this. So you can go to IDEO, the world's largest product design firm, and they will exhibit much of this discipline. In the absence of the stuff in blue, they will have little better than random results, long-term, in getting return on investment. But if there is the things in blue, if those things in blue are present, a great design firm will materially make a difference. What the design firms also tend not to understand, however, is that all the things that win today are platforms, not products. And so that is a strategic transformation, and your job as a leader is to extend it, enlarge it, make it more pervasive in the world. That's where you get the massively amplified return on investment that makes it one of that 2% of projects that gets amongst the 90% of the global economic value added. Now, I don't have time to cover very much of this model at all, but I thought it would be a great gift and a profound jumpstart to our conversation if I brought you diagnostics separated by regions. So we specifically adapted a diagnostic technique for this meeting to try to reinforce some sense of the innovation patterns in different regions. Let me begin by explaining the technique that we invented in 1998, and that is now in version 5.8 of its technology. This is called an innovation landscape. And it is a terrain map grown by library scientists that shows, in this case, for computers and peripherals, the patterns and actions of the entire industry globally over the last 11 years. So to do this, we download announcements of activity. Think of it as press releases, patent filings. In this particular case, more than 100 million such announcements. And we look at them over time. So time comes forward along the left edge. Along the front are the same 10 types of innovation that I sort of shared with you just a few moments ago. I know they're hard to read, but the same 10, same order. And what we have here is a terrain map that is grown specifically from the hundreds of millions of announcements of activity in this industry by all of its players worldwide. It's a way of sharing the collective sense of possibilities and actions and judgments of a highly variegated set of firms and enterprises in the entire value chain for personal computers and peripherals. But remember the facts. Only 4 companies amongst hundreds in this arena reliably make money. Most of them lose money. When you look at any of these models from Doblin, I can tell you in just a few moments the 3 things to look for. The first thing that jumps out at you is tall peaks. In fact, we color code them so that they do jump out. You see the black color there. What's going on is it's a way of saying, boy, this is an industry completely filled with engineers who persuade themselves that they don't make these things continuously smaller and lighter and cheaper with better battery life and higher screen resolution and more capacious disk drives. Well, they are going to die a grisly death, okay? And so this is an industry that's hyper-investing in product performance, spending, in fact, too much money. So the first thing you look for is big peaks. What they tell you is bring your checkbook. It's going to be expensive, keeping up. The second thing to look for is many peaks. For personal computers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 significant peaks. What that means is it's complicated. You'll fail at it if you don't have simultaneous teams developing different dimensions of innovation and carefully integrating it. It's complicated and needs good methods. The third thing to look for in all cases is the valleys. And frankly, I've been doing this for so many years that that's my starting place. When I look at the valleys, what I know instinctively and instantly is a comparatively smaller amount of money invested there will get a much higher result, much sooner, okay? In fact, when you see, as you see in this case, a distinctive fall off since 1999 in business model innovation, that's what would have predicted years ago Michael Dell's recent financial troubles, okay? So that's one industry. Let me switch now to a service business, because it doesn't matter what you study. You can study anything with this technique. I will switch now to the industry that has, sort of abused me for the last couple of days, the passenger airline travel system. Many of you, too, I'm sure. Notice that this industry has no culture of performance worldwide. Notice that it has lousy experiences worldwide, and it has only one business model that has succeeded, and that's 30 years old. But suddenly 14 companies around the world are trying to copy it, okay? This is an industry that loses more money than it makes worldwide, structurally bankrupt. It's pretty much dead from the neck up, okay? This is the single toughest industry you will ever see. If, after you've been all filled up with innovation ideas at the Future Trends Forum, you decide to go home and start your own pharmaceutical company, I urge you to lay down until the feeling goes away. Okay? There is no industry that is tougher to innovate in than this one, measured by the total area under the curves here, and yet no industry gets a higher return on investment for its innovation efforts. So that's basics. You can also use the technique, as we have done, for instance, to look at the entire $1.9 trillion marketplace in North America for medicine. And when you look at it from the vantage point of the victims, patients, you can see who touches the patients, who's farther removed from them, and you can quickly make discoveries about innovation patterns, strengths, and weaknesses. But for you, what I've done is adapt the methodology to look not at individual lines of business, but instead at regions. And I did that by taking the representatives of this meeting, looking at the GDP of those various countries represented here, and then for each of those, adapted the technique to show the innovation patterns that are prevailing. Okay? So this is Germany, UK, China, France, Spain, India, Ireland, Israel, and Singapore. And if we then go under the covers and look at the innovation patterns in those regions, you can discover them in this order. Here's Germany's innovation patterns. Nice, healthy use of many different types of innovation, too much emphasis on technology and engineering. I know that comes as a shock to those of you that know a lot of Germans. And a sort of distinctive fall-off recently in the focus on that kind of engineering excellence. Here's the United Kingdom. Should alarm some of you in the room that no one has more robust innovation patterns than the UK, and they've had those patterns for some time. I suppose when you lose your empire globally and you get reduced to your little island that you started it all from, you start to get clever after a period of time. Here is China. China has a very interesting condition of increases in slope in several distinctive areas in recent times. I'm sure that doesn't surprise too many of you. But there is a reasonably sophisticated approach to things in the center of the model. When China wants to further leverage its innovation patterns, it will move to the periphery. Things that are center-weighted like this tend to be brittle and tend to be easily disrupted by other regions. Here's France, a pattern very similar to Germany's, which is interesting in and of itself. And here is Spain locally. Again, a little bit too much center weighting and not enough focus on experience, surprisingly, for people who have learned to have an awful lot of fun in different regions lately. Here's India. India is a very interesting case that had lots of innovation in the pre-dot-com era, the dot-com era before dot-com post. And then, as you can see, it went through several years of decline in their innovation patterns, but it's coming back with a vengeance just now. Here's Ireland, which, as you know, achieved the highest GDP per capita recently in all of Europe. So their innovation patterns were of some interest to me. And it is very similar to France and Germany overall, but with a much higher amplitude than you would guess on the basis of the GDP that they have and the population count that they have. So that's one of the things that's quite interesting. We will hear from Israel this morning and from Singapore. So here is Israel for a place that is so focused on life in the desert in harsh conditions. This is a surprisingly, what I would describe as low robust innovation pattern. A lot of engineering focus and a lot of science focus, research and development, very little focus on experiences, modular product systems, and business models, surprisingly. And this is Singapore. So I know, David, you run a pretty interesting fund system in Singapore. What's so interesting in Singapore is they have the opposite condition of of India. At exactly the moment that India lost its nerve for innovating, Singapore came on strong. And that in and of itself is a fascinating phenomenon that is a reflection of choices made by leaders there. Very robust focus in the 1995 to 1997 period, intensity of focus post-dot-com, and when dot-com post happened. But then there was a very serious decline around 2003, and it's only beginning to come back. I don't know the structural causes for that. David, maybe you can help me. Chris is standing at the ready to say he needs to seize control of the agenda, and I don't blame him, but there are some common lessons here. Countries tend to have weak and simplistic innovation patterns compared to companies that know what they're doing and innovate with malice aforethought, okay? So what I'm noticing is that this principle of 10 types of innovation and disciplined protocols to innovate, not yet well understood, and there will certainly be more innovation improvement as people add more types of innovation and more sophisticated and disciplined methods. There is some very powerful research in the world that Doblin has helped to participate in on the necessary preconditions for regional innovation effectiveness. So if you've never seen it before, these are the high correlates if you want to get an entire region to come to life. Nobody's better at thinking about this, I think, in an applied sense than Monitor. And so they have lots and lots of thoughts about this. I have posted my notes for you on a secure website so that you can reflect on this at a slower pace than what I've done to you. If you want the notes, go to clientweb.doblin.com, log in as bankinterftf. Only the password is case sensitive, and it's an all lowercase innovation. Chris, sorry to go long on you, sir.